Russian state media and war bloggers in the country are reporting that Russian forces have taken control of the first village in Ukraine's central eastern region of Dnipro-Petrovsk. At this stage, there has been no official confirmation from Kiev or Moscow. But let's get the latest with global affairs analyst Michael Bociurkuw, who joins me now from London. Michael, many thanks for your time today. Now, how concerning is this reported Russian advance in this part of Ukraine, in Dnipro-Petrovsk?
Sure, good to be with you again. Well, it's consistent with what has been predicted by various groups, including the Institute for the Study of War, as well as the East Europe Foundation, that the summer offensive will be intensified. And in a worst case scenario, Girish, the Russians could gain up to 60 kilometers. The front line could move 60 kilometers, and that could trigger an outflow of migrants of up to 250,000 people into other parts of Ukraine and beyond its borders. So huge concern. And also at the same time, Russia is establishing so-called buffer zones in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. So a lot of ground being taken by the Russians, and this is happening as Ukraine is struggling with getting more munitions, more weapons from Europe as well as Europe. It's really struggling in terms of manpower, resources as well. And then, of course, on top of that, as we see on a nightly basis, as we did last night, especially the night before, pounding of Ukrainian cities with heavy drone and missile fire.
Yes, speaking of that, there were those massive strikes, nearly 500 drones and 60 missiles. That's according to the president, Volodymyr Zelensky. Michael, You've labeled it as air armageddon. How big are these strikes? And is Ukraine on notice of more to come as this summer offensive goes on?
Yeah, absolutely huge. The night before last, it was the biggest since the start of the war, over 500 drones as well as missiles. Now, I think everyone is getting used to that word drones. They're Shahed 136s. But the big difference here is that the production has shifted from Iran to Russia, to a special economic zone, which, by the way, is reportedly supported by the Chinese. Now, the drones coming our way in Ukraine now are much more powerful, much more deadly. They fly at higher speed, and they're more difficult to shoot down. And in the air armageddon the other night, as I called it, F-16 was brought down as well, and sadly a pilot died. So it's massive destruction, and air defenses just aren't enough. One last thing here, at the NATO summit, when Mr. Zelensky spoke to Mr. Trump and others, Mr. Trump did promise more Patriot missile defense systems, but we're told there just aren't enough to go around between U.S. needs and also Israeli growing needs.
Yeah, and on those airstrikes, it was, enough to even force other NATO countries to scramble their jets, countries like Poland. So do countries like that fear that there would be some form of Russian aggression on the horizon?
Oh, yeah, it's really growing, especially in the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. And of course, at that NATO summit in The Hague, we did hear a repledging, if you will, of the article that specifies an attack on one state is an attack on the entire NATO. However, we've seen so many Russian drones and parts of missiles fall on NATO territory, for example, in Poland and Romania, and you hardly hear a peep. To me, that indicates that there is a fear in NATO of promoting Russia. What good is this article unless it's actually acted upon?
Yes, and on the NATO summit, does it give Ukraine any more confidence? Because many of the leaders have pledged to boost defense spending, something that Donald Trump has been calling for quite some time, even before his second presidency.
Well, let me put it to you this way. There's good news for Ukraine and states immediately under threat by Russia. And there's bad news for countries like the UK, where I am right now, Canada, Australia. And I'll explain why briefly. For Ukraine, of course, the extra spending will help it get more munitions, more missiles. And also, the wording was put in such a way that it was a direct result of Russia aggression, that spending needs to go up. And of course, they mentioned the word terrorism. Bad news is that if states, member NATO states of NATO were to pledge only 3.5%, that's $13.4 trillion of spending. and pick up any newspaper here in the UK, and they're really struggling here to pay for basic services. So no one really knows where that money will come from. And the same thing, of course, in my home country of Canada, I suspect in Australia as well. The budgets are really tight. Competing resources are very, very high right now for this kind of money to suddenly be shifted to defense spending.
Yes, in which case this might favor Russia, but also do you think perhaps Moscow has capitalized on the distraction that is the conflict between Iran and Israel, this war that started and ended pretty quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. They're welcoming the distraction, and they're pounding Ukrainian cities, as I said, on a nightly basis. But, having said that, Russia did, you may recall, Russia did sign a strategic partnership with Iran, with the clerics there way back in January. Where was Russia at Iran's most dire need? So I think that might signal to the friends of Russia, which few it has left, that it can't be depended upon. But again, what Ukrainians were hoping that the pounding of Tehran, especially strategic sites, would reduce the flow of munitions from Iran to Russia. But again, because Russia has established that domestic production, it's not going to have a big effect. So quickly, they're going to have to lean more as well on North Korea and China to keep their war machine funded.
Yes, and finally, Michael, as this war rages on, now Zelensky wants to pull Ukraine out of the Ottawa Convention that bans anti-personnel mines. What's the rationale behind that, and will that be something that will be supported by Ukraine's military allies?
Sure. Well, if you meet with people like Halo Trust, as I did the other day, they will tell you that landmines are an enormous problem in Ukraine. I believe it's something like 136,000 square kilometers, equal to the U.S. state of Arkansas. It's a huge effort to clear that land, to make it safe enough, for example, to farmers go and use their fields again. But on the other hand, Zelensky is saying, look, the Russians are not part of the Ottawa Convention. They're planting landmines with abandon. We need the same capability. And then quickly, also, Northern European states are exiting the Ottawa Convention so they can build a kind of mined Berlin Wall against Russia. You can't blame them given the threat from Russia.
Okay, Michael Bociurkuw, always appreciate your insights into what's happening in Ukraine. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.